Hey everybody, welcome to the Parrish studio. We have a great friend of mine, Tony Zanetta. I've known Tony. Hi, how are you? I've known Tony for 45 years since this. He says 1975. I'm scared, but probably I must have been 15 years old when I ran away from home with a mutual friend, Cherry Vanilla.
You were 15 years old. You were definitely 15 years old. But I was 10 or 12 or something like that, I think.
You were what?
10 or 12.
Yeah, all right, yeah, okay, great, yeah, all right, yeah, Anyway, so I've known Tony for a really long time. Tony has a couple of, I call him a downtown New York legend. There are certain people that have been really very integral with the New York City scene in the 70s, and Tony was definitely one of them. Friends like Cherry Vanilla and other people, we were all kind of just in the right place at the right time, and we all kind of hung out together. So Tony's here. He worked with Andy Warhol. He worked in Andy Warhol's Polk play, which was in London and New York, which we'll talk about in a second. And he was also the road manager for David Bowie for Ziggy Stardust, which is, I was a road manager with Village People. I was tortured, so I'd love to talk to him about that. Well, hey, Tony, welcome. And yeah, thank you for being here and doing this. So you were in Polk in London and in New York, and at that point, was it a scandalous play? Because, well, first of all, can you explain the process that it was broken up into? It was recordings that
Well, anything, Andy was the epicenter of New York City in
Andy Warhol. Yeah.
Late 60s, early 70s. Anything having to do with Warhol was pretty, I don't know if the word is sensational, but it was very exciting. It was certainly exciting. And this was the only play he ever did. And in some ways, the play was a little bit, when he first did the Silk Screens, like, say, the Campbell Soup cans, the Campbell Soup cans were basically paintings of illustrations, but because they were put on the wall in a gallery, it was art.
Interesting.
So that is,
well, the beginning of pop art. It's pop art.
It was pop art, but it was also very conceptual art. In some ways, it was the beginning of conceptual art. It was the idea of art more than art.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, it's the art of art. Yeah.
So the play was actually the same thing, because the play was taken from tape-recorded conversations. In those days, the cassette recorder was a whole new technology, and you had these little cassette recorders that you could carry around with you, and there was a telephone attachment. People began to tape
little
all
suction cup, right? It was a suction cup you put on the back. A suction cup you put on the back of the earpiece. I remember those. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So it was brand new, and everybody got them, and
I wonder if that's what led to Cherry Vanilla taping her phone sex conversations, which led to a telephone, which led to a CD that Cherry and I did, because she taped all these phone sex conversations on the phone. Exactly. She was doing, she was a call girl in the sense of call on the telephone. She would do phone sex at one point, and we taped it and turned it into a record. Anyway, go ahead. Just wanted to throw that in there.
Oh, now I've totally lost my train of thought. Let's see. What was I?
All right. So they taped it, and he did
the conversations and transcribed them, but there were hundreds of hours of them. They were all given to a downtown director named Tony Zanetta, whose work Andy liked. Tony took the transcriptions and kind of cut and pasted them together, and then we put them on stage, and it was suddenly a play. Really, it was performance art more than a play, but because we did it in a theater, just like he did his soup can illustrations in a gallery, suddenly this was a play. So it was the same kind of conceptual idea as his art was.
Was there a story? Was an audience viewing a happening, or was there a story going through it, or was it just little spurts of?
It was a lot of talking. There was no narrative. Right. Kind of, a little bit, but it wasn't really a narrative. It was just a lot of talking. Most of the tapes were Bridget Polk, who was a Warhol superstar. She was in Chelsea Girls. She was also an heiress. Her father worked for the Hearst Corporation. She was a very wealthy girl from Park Avenue.
Who else was in it?
They wouldn't put her name in the magazines because her father, if there was a Hearst magazine. Anyway.
Who else was in it?
A lot. There's an excellent documentary about her called Pie in the Sky. It's really good. So a lot of it was her talking, and she was a speech freak, and boy, could she talk. And that's the character that Cherry played in London.
Cherry Vanilla.
Had pages and pages and pages of dialogue to memorize, which wasn't so easy.
Yeah. Who else was in the place?
Wayne County.
Wow.
This is pre-Jane County. This was Wayne County.
When he was a man in drag.
Let's see. And Harvey Firestein made his debut in the New York production at La Mama.
Wow.
Maid, yes.
Was Holly Woodlawn in it?
No. The only real superstar that was in it was Jerry Miller. Jerry was a topless go-go dancer. She was in Flesh, Warhol's Flesh, and Trash. She was in both of those movies.
And Candy Darling wasn't around then?
Oh, yeah, she was around, but she wasn't in the play.
Oh.
Candy Darling and Tony and Gracia grew up together on Long Island.
Wow.
Jimmy Slattery and Tony and Gracia. And with a friend of mine named Tom Carberry, who was my college roommate, which is how I met Candy Darling.
It's so incestuous. It's crazy.
I met them in 1966 when I moved to New York.
Well, I tell people New York was such a small town, really, and there were very few places to go and hang out. So if you were kind of like, not going to a jazz club or something, you went to common places like Max's Kansas City, where people hung out, and you got to meet all these kind of famous people. But they weren't really
a very small community.
Yeah, it was a very small community, and I was a kid from Brooklyn, and I used to take the train in because there was nothing going on in Brooklyn, and hang out at these places because there was nowhere else to go. You didn't have 30 clubs to go to; you only had one or two places, and if you got into them, you kind of hung out with who's who of New York because they went out every night like they did. Oh, that's great.
A guy named Kembrew McLeod just wrote a book called The Downtown Pop Underground, which deals with all of this and all of these interconnections. It's a pretty fascinating book, actually, if you're interested in this kind of thing.
MoMA just did one, too, for the 80s, Club 57.
The Club 57.
Well, it's Club 57 because that became a cafe society for Keith Haring and Kenny Sharp. I was there.
Right.
A lot of Mark Shaman. A lot of people were there because it was the 80s version of what we went through in the 70s. And I was a 15-year-old in the middle of all this stuff going on, which is pretty amazing. Polk went to London.
Right. What I wanted to tell you was when we were in New York, there was a Rolling Stone magazine that had a big feature on, I think it was Rolling Stone, maybe it was something else. I think it was Rolling Stone. Had a big feature on Warhol in the factory. And in that same issue was a small article about a young singer-songwriter named David Bowie.
Unknown,
David had just come to the U.S. on a promotional tour. He didn't have a working visa. He was still on Mercury Records.
For Hunky Dory? Is this Hunky Dory album?
No. This is before Hunky Dory.
Wow.
This is the Man Who Sold the World.
Huh.
It's the album where he's on the cover with kind of long...
Yeah, with the Veronica Lake, yeah.
He's wearing a man's dress.
Yeah.
Which was sort of titillating to us in Pork, particularly to Wayne and Lee Childers and I. We were like, oh, who's this guy wearing a dress? Especially because he was married and had a kid.
Yeah.
He had the kid shortly after, about the same time we got to London.
Which today is Duncan Jones, which did the movie Moon and stuff like that. Yeah. He was known as Zoe Bowie in those days, and I remember going to the circus with Angie and Zoe and Cherry. Angie Bowie was his ex-wife. Anyway, wow. So was that article kind to him, or is it here's a freak, or just here's
No, it was fine. It was kind. I mean, it was kind. So
you did Pork in London, and Cherry went over and did Pork in London. It was a little scandalous because there was nudity in it, but there was a lot of nude things. I remember.
Well, there were a couple of things that happened that were scandalous. The first thing was we did a photo session and an interview with the news of the world. But we didn't know what news of the world.
I know. I was on it as fucking Madonna. I know that newspaper very well. To Americans, that's yeah. I was going to say to Americans, that was a National Enquirer. Yeah.
So we did the session with them, and we were outrageous individually, and we were really outrageous as a group. God knows what we said, but
because you had power and safety.
I can't remember the article, but it was pretty scandalous. And they called we lived in a house called an apartment in Earl's Court Square called Langham Mansion, which from then on was known as Pig Mansion.
Because of pork.
Because of pork, and because we were so piggy and outrageous. And so we from Pig Mansion ever after that. Then there was another little session in front of Buckingham Palace where Jerry Miller was in the play. Jerry Miller was the only true Warhol superstar. She was a topless dancer. She was in flesh and she was in trash. And she was quite a beautiful girl, very vapid, great body, proud to show her silicone tits to anyone that wanted to see them. So she's being photographed on the street in London, and she pulled her top down and showed her tits. And I think got arrested in front of Buckingham.
Well, what I'd love to say is that part of New York in the 70s, it wasn't about a particular person, it was about individuals and how creative and expressive they were. So somebody was a topless dancer, and somebody was an artist, and somebody painted with feces, and somebody was, a trapeze artist, and the other person was a sex contortionist, and they were all on the same level because you were an individual expressing yourself, and a lot of that we don't have now. But it's this perfect example of that you're all individually outrageous, but you're all individually unique and different, and that was kind of celebrated, which is a really good thing, which is a really great thing.
Well, New York at that time, was broke. It was very cheap to live in New York in the early 70s and late 60s, early 70s. So it created an atmosphere of, it attracted a lot of eccentric people. We were all
thank God.
Thousands of us, and we could live in New York without really working too much. We could afford to develop our personalities, shall we say?
Yeah, that's great.
And have fun and make whatever kind of art that we were interested in. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and art wasn't a painting. It could have been just a lifestyle. Sometimes people's lifestyles were the art that they were doing, which was actually great.
Right.
So how did pork...
And the whole gay liberation idea, it was women's liberation, gay liberation, all of that was exploding at that time.
But it was still in its infancy, though, because there was it was the beginning of Stonewall and all that kind of stuff, but even though that exploded, it was more of a local thing. You couldn't go to the suburbs and be gay. You couldn't go to New Jersey and be gay. It was okay within certain confines and certain neighborhoods to be gay. I remember, and that took quite a while, although we were part of that movement, which is kind of great. Not only for gays.
Well, it wasn't mainstream, no.
Right, like it is now. Kids are so lucky that they don't have to deal with that. So you did Pork, and then what happened after Pork? Did you do other plays? Did you direct stuff? Or did you go, did the Bowie thing happen?
Well, while I was in London, I met David and Angie. David was a big fan of Warhol's. And also, I don't know if you're aware of Dana Gillespie. She was an English singer. She's still around.
I was a an artist, I know.
They were good friends. And Dan actually auditioned for an understudy role in Pork. And we always thought that she stole a script. I don't know if she stole the script or not. And gave it to him. And that's how he wrote the song
Andy Warhol. Interesting.
But at any rate, he was very interested in Warhol. He wanted to come to the play. And Cherry and Lee and Jane, a.k.a. Wayne. Jane was still Wayne then.
Jane County, yeah, Wayne County.
David was doing a little gig at a place called the Country Club. And it was actually just a folk gig. He's just sitting there with a guitar playing and singing. And they went and met him, and he introduced them, and Cherry popped a tit, which was her signature movement. Because that was a Bridget Pope.
Yeah.
But they were actually, and Cherry kind of denies it now, but they were very disappointed because he was not exciting at all. He was like a boring little folk singer.
Well, was he introverted? I mean, was he? I mean, people, think
David was a very quiet guy. He was not an exhibitionist. He was not flamboyant in any way.
Yeah, same thing with Klaus Nomi and other people that I've met. You'd expect them to be all over the place. Divine is a perfect example. You expect them to be all over the place, but they're very, very quiet, very introverted, unless they get behind these stage personalities and on stage, and then they can do these things, and you come off, and they're completely different. Wow. So
David was very quiet, very intense. In my opinion of David is he was a true artist.
Like a thinker.
All he was interested in was his art. But his art involved many times he would incorporate you into his art, or he would kind of, he would want to get into your head. Yeah. He was very, very seductive, and he would, he was very good one-on-one with people. He had a lot of charm, but basically, everything was fodder for his art.
No, I mean, a lot of people think that he stole people's ideas, but I don't think he's like Klaus with on Saturday Night Live. I don't think he stole them. He kind of incorporated them and spit them back out again. You know what I mean? So, I mean, some of it's thievery and some of it, isn't. I don't think he was not talented and need other people's art. I think he was just taking it and digesting it and spitting it out for his vision and stuff like that, which is
and he did it better.
Yeah, he actually did. He pushed it up. He talked about. Yeah, we've talked about Polk being done in a kind of a cut and paste method, which he would talk about. That's the way he did his songs, in a cut and paste method. But in other ways, he did everything in a cut and paste method because he kind of took ideas from the culture and cut and pasted them together. I want to explain
something that so-and-so did or something that someone else did, but when he cut and pasted them together, they became something totally different.
I want to explain to people what cut and paste is. Some people, they would take lyrics and they would cut them into lines, and then they would rearrange the lines again, and that would become the piece of art that you've done. So you'd write a poem, you'd write down ideas, you'd shuffle them around, and that shuffle became the piece of art. If people don't know what cut and paste is, so I'm going to.
And also, David had worked with Lindsay Kemp. Lindsay Kemp's mime. Lindsay Kemp was a mime artist.
Famous, yeah.
And Lindsay, to call him a mime artist isn't exactly accurate, because I think that David got a lot of this attitude of how to create art from Lindsay. Because what Lindsay would espouse is Lindsay also he took rock and roll, he took opera, he took ballet, he took mime, he took drag, he took circus and clown, and put it all together to make his own form. And he talked about shopping at the best stores, and stealing a bit from here, a bit from there, and creating your own thing. So that was kind of a new way of working. It wasn't so purist. It was and in many ways, in New York City, the same thing was happening with the Playhouse of the Ridiculous and all of the theater of the ridiculous. John Vaccaro, who I worked with in the Playhouse of the Ridiculous,
I
spent a lot of time in Japan when he was younger. A lot of his work was based on kabuki theater, no theater, but there was drag involved. There was maybe commedia dell'arte. There were all kinds of things that were coming together to create something new.
Did Bowie tap into
reflect that?
Yeah, I was going to say, did Bowie probably tapped into all that? But it's the kabuki
Absolutely.
And all that. Yeah.
So Bowie was always the main difference between him and a lot of other rock and rollers is, well, several, but he was much more cerebral. He studied things. He learned. He wasn't really the best musician or singer.
No, that I know.
Any of those things. He was a smart guy. He wanted to make theater using rock and roll, and he figured out how to do it.
Well, it's about theater.
Other people were their impulse. They were becoming more. They were musicians. That's different. He wasn't really a musician first.
Yes, I'm not a musician. I studied at at Fame, High School Performing Arts, and then I worked at the Metropolitan Opera House. So I was more interested in putting on a show. The music wasn't secondary, but I had to have something going on stage, hence all the costumes that I did and all that kind of stuff. So I understand that was about theater. It wasn't about music, because otherwise he could have sat there with his guitar and just played like any other musician. But this whole...
Well, he tried that. It didn't get him very well.
Yeah, it didn't get him well. So you met him at this place, and how did you get involved with him? Or was it Main Man happened, through me?
No. Well, I met him. He and his wife came to the show with his manager Tony DeFries and with Dan Gillespie and with Mick Ronson, and then some of us went out later to the Sombrero, which was a gay club in London, and I hit it off first with Angie. Angie and I kind of really connected, and anyway, Angie invited me to come to their house the next day, which I did. But the interesting thing is they didn't live in London; they lived in a suburb. They lived in Beckenham. So she said, I asked her how to get there, whatever, I don't know. And she said they'd send a car, which I thought was, oh, that's kind of interesting. They're going to send me. So at the appointed time, a middle-aged woman knocked on the door at Pig Mansion. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I got in the car. I had no idea where I was going.
Was this a limousine or was this somebody's car?
No, it was a minicab.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't a limousine, no.
Okay.
But I think it was a service that they used all the time.
Yeah, like a car service. Okay.
But Mrs. whatever her name was showed up at the door. She took me to Beckenham, but it was, I very distinctly remember the feeling. It was like, I don't know where I'm going, but why not? And that was kind of became the next few years of my life. You know? Now, Amen didn't happen for another year or so.
Right, okay.
What did happen is, so we got along really, really well. And again, what I viewed as an instant friendship was actually David sort of, pulling out everything he could from me about the factory in New York and all that kind of stuff, which was fine. But we liked each other. We got along very well. Now, the next week or two, it was only a couple of weeks. Well, this was towards the end of the run of Polk. So shortly afterwards, I went. I think I invited them to the closing night, and they came. That was interesting because we used to go to the Hard Rock Cafe. The Hard Rock Cafe in London had just opened,
which is not the chain that it is now, right? Okay.
So it wasn't at all like what it is now. Right. It was very trendy. It was almost like a private club, and you had to be kind of handpicked to get in. But we would go there almost every night after the play and carry on and dance on tables and da-da-da-da-da. So I invited them to come with me to the Hard Rock Cafe. He was not comfortable because he really wasn't comfortable unless he was the center of attention. And he was like when David wasn't comfortable, he almost would disappear. He had an ability to kind of turn his charisma on and off, almost like a light switch. If he wanted to be noticed, that switch would go on. And it literally was like a light on him. But otherwise, his introverted self would totally take over, and you wouldn't even know that he was there.
Wow.
Anyway, they came to New York a couple weeks later to sign with RCA. And they did, and I was with them. And that was the famous trip because I took him to the factory to meet Andy. We met Iggy Pop.
He must have been in heaven. He must have been in heaven.
Well, it was awkward, but it was good.
Really? Was it really? Really?
Well, David was not an exhibitionist at all. And Andy, you had to kind of entertain. That wasn't David's personality. They were both kind of introspective. So it was like they finally found common ground in his shoes. He was wearing yellow Mary Janes, and Andy otherwise, it was a little bit awkward, and Andy did not like the song, which he played for him.
Interesting.
But David also met Lou Reed, and he met Iggy Pop, all in that one week. So he met Warhol, Iggy, Lou. So that was the beginning of
the beginning.
For sure.
Was he touring as a rock band with Mick Ronson then, like in England?
No.
So this is pre-Ziggy Stardust?
No, Tony DeFries, when they started working together, I mean, no matter what, Tony DeFries was David's manager. And his reputation is this, that, and the other thing, but in my opinion, he was a brilliant man. He was a brilliant manager, particularly at that moment. And he unraveled he stopped David from working for a couple of years. During that time, he unraveled all of the mess of the messy business.
Yeah, he was amazing. He was my manager too, and managed to get a crazy amount of money out of Elektra for a single. Instead of 10,000, I got 125,000 out of Elektra for a single. I never saw the money, but that's a whole other story. You know what I mean? But Tony was brilliant when it came to his business management stuff. Yes, absolutely.
And the deals he made for David were pretty brilliant. He's one of the first people to make a deal where the masters returned to the artist after X number of years. Before that, the masters were owned by the record company.
Returned to the artist or returned to Tony as a management company?
Well, they returned to Main Man, but they were jointly owned then by Tony and David.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So Main Man didn't exist yet, though. They were all still with the English companies, yeah, but we don't have to get into it.
Yeah.
But then, so David hadn't worked in a couple. You also have to realize when you think about David Bowie, at that point he was about 25, but he had been making records since he was 15. So he basically was a failure.
Right. He
had tried all sorts of things that did not work. And he was very ambitious. He wanted fame. He wanted to be a pop star. So this was like kind of, the last go around.
Yeah. Interesting.
But he had already written Ziggy Stardust at this point, and he had already started working with Mick Ronson. See, everything really changed for David when he and Mick Ronson came together.
They knew each other in England, but came to America together, or David came to America, put the band together, and then called Mick Ronson over?
No. David didn't put a band together in America. All he did was sign the recording deal in America.
Without a band. Wow.
The RCA Global. He was not signed to RCA UK. Most artists would have been signed to RCA UK. Joe DeFries did not want that. He wanted him to be a global artist, and he wanted the clout of the bigger company.
Right.
He was right. So the RCA, the corporate, could put pressure on RCA UK for all sorts of things. He wouldn't have had nearly the power if he had been signed to RCA UK. But everything was being done out of England. They were only here for a few days. Then they went back to England.
Oh, okay.
So but he had been working with Mick for probably a year at that point. And everything changed once he started working with Mick because the sound changed.
Yeah, Mick Ronson's guitar is like unbelievable, Yeah.
And Mick was also classically trained. He was an arranger. He brought a whole musical element that had been missing until that point. And he brought kind of balls to the music.
Yeah.
Because the music could be... David, left to his own devices, could be a little bit too ethereal.
Yeah. No. Yeah, no. Well, look at the Low album. You know what I mean? I mean, I get, which is brilliant, but I understand. Yeah, that part I understand. Yeah.
So they began to work on preparing for stage shows to promote Ziggy. They began to do photo sessions. That's when Nick Rock first photographed him. They began this whole strategic plan around Ziggy Stardust.
Before the costumes?
Well, they were developing the costumes.
My stuff was Kansai Yamamoto too, which, was also David's. If you're a Bowie fan or if you know David Bowie, I also knew Pierre LaRoche. That was a whole other story. He wanted to marry me and take me to Paris with Maddie, I love you. Come away with me.
Kansai wasn't doing the costumes yet. That was later. It was Freddie Barrett.
Oh.
Freddie Barrett was a gay boy from the Sombrero.
Oh.
David had already done a whole project around Freddie. David did something called Arnold Corns, probably in 1970. Freddie was very beautiful, and David decided that he should be a pop star. So he did this whole, it was kind of like a Ziggy practice on Freddie.
So Kansai is a big Japanese designer that did the striped pants and stuff. Was Freddie doing more of that cloth stuff? Like the one arm and
No, those were Kansai things. Freddie did all those kind of jumpsuits.
Oh, did the jumpsuits?
The original costumes were more Clockwork. If you look at Clockwork Orange, they came from there.
Okay.
But a lot of not that many of the clothes were Kansai, to tell you the truth. Kansai Yamamoto did a huge fashion show in London at around that time. which the Bowie fell in love with. I mean, it was, I saw videos of it. It was absolutely spectacular.
If it wasn't for Joey Arias, I wouldn't have the Kansai costumes. I mean, he has them now, graffiti jackets and a jumpsuit and all that, but his stuff is amazing. But I didn't realize, and most people don't realize, that there was somebody else, like you said, you mentioned his name, I didn't even know that helped.
Really? Freddie? Yeah. No, Freddie's pretty well known for that. A lot of people know about Freddie. And Freddie did, and this is where Angie's contribution really comes in. Angie would go into town. She bought tons and tons of fabric at Liberty of London. Liberty of London is like, one of the best textile companies in the world, and a department stores. But it's very kind of traditional English. But they bought all these fabrics, and then Freddie sewed them into these outfits.
Wow.
So all of the early clothes were done by Freddie. Kansai's clothes started, with the pull-off costume, all of that stuff. But that was certainly on the first United States Ziggy tour. There were no Kansai costumes. They came starting at the Radio City show, which was Valentine's Day of 1973.
Were you involved in that show?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I did all the Ziggy stuff.
So again, because I have some questions about the road managing process. So again, so you got it. So you're friends with him. You're there with this stuff, and then was it Tony who wanted you to be a road manager? Was it David that convinced Tony, or? Well,
we didn't even use those words.
I know. My friend's coming with me on the road. He's going to take care of it, and he'll collect the money.
They kept it. So what happened was. So David's in England, and they're getting whatever they're getting everything together. Tony would come back and forth between New York and London because he was always going to visit the people at the record company. And every time he came, he would call me. I was their guy in New York. Basically.
Oh, I see. Great.
So to dinner, I would do like little errands, but basically errands. And he would give me a couple $100 or whatever. Cherry and I went to the record company and picked up records and passed them out to our friends. We'd pick up photographs and pass them out to our friends. Because by this time, both Hunky Dory and I think Ziggy had been released. Hunky Dory certainly had been released. Maybe Ziggy hadn't quite been released yet. And then Tony wanted a New York headquarters. So I found an apartment on East 58th Street. And then I began to buy furniture. I did everything that needed to be done in New York. That was the beginning of Main Man.
Right.
There's a funny story about Cherry and I were at Max's one night.
Max's Kansas City.
And Cherry, I don't know if you ever knew Hal Fredericks. Cherry had a roommate. She lived with this guy, Hal, up on the Upper East Side. He had a fantastic apartment, huge. It was a penthouse with a huge terrace. Hal, he was gay, but Hal had been in the Korean War and he had been injured and he couldn't walk. He was in a wheelchair. But he went out he was a painter, he was an artist. He was also a country western singer, and he was out every night, all over town. Nothing stopped Hal. So we were all at Max's one night, Hal, Cherry, and I, and we were sitting with Jackie Curtis. So I have to tell them with Jackie Curtis.
End of story. There you go. Boom.
So I was like, "Oh, you all have to come up to East 58th Street to see the apartment." So we threw Hal into a taxi, put the wheelchair in the back. We all went up to East 58th Street. Now, first of all, it was a nice apartment, but it was a walk-up. I mean, it wasn't high. I think it was the third floor. So I had to carry Hal up the stairs.
Oh my God!
And then after a while, Hal and Terry decided to leave. We had a good time, so they had to carry him back down the stairs and blah blah blah. But Jackie was just a speeding away, and Jackie's speeding and speeding and talking and talking and speeding and talking, and it's getting later and later and later and later and later. And I'm tired. I finally fall asleep. And I wake up the next morning, Jackie's still sitting on the edge of my bed talking.
Those were the days.
And that morning, the telephone man was coming to install all of our phones. So he comes. He's kind of a young, kind of hot-looking guy. And he's looking at Jackie and looking at me. installing the phones. And at one point, he motions me over and he says, "Is that your girl?"
That's a long story.
Jackie would always say, "I don't want them to ask who Jackie Curtis is. I want them to say, what's Jackie Curtis?" So finally, at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, in the blazing white sun, when Jackie leaves the apartment onto East 58th Street, which was, all interior decorators. It was across the street from the D&D building. She walks outside with her schmata and her hair going every which way, and 10 pounds of makeup and shopping
and stubble coming through the makeup, I'm sure, yeah.
And this decorator comes up to me after Jackie walks down the street and says, "What was that?"
Because that wasn't common in those days. Yeah.
Jackie was in that month's Vogue with Holly and Candy. And it was the whole thing was people are talking about Warhol's Women Who Are Men. And I pulled out this and I said, "This is Jackie." Then Tony came. He took me back to London with him. And when I got back to New York, Jackie had visited in my absence and somehow gotten into the building and left me a note. Except she wrote it all over the wall outside of the apartment. Now, I love this story because it's kind of like the connection between Jackie Curtis and David Bowie.
Wow.
There's a great picture taken at the Mud Club of the two of them. Yeah. Both kind of handling James Dean.
Yeah, I know that picture. Wow. So you wound up on the road with David.
Well, then what happened is Tony said, "Well, Z," he called me Z because we were a lot of Tony Z, come to London. So again, it was just like the car ride to Beckenham. I don't know what the hell. I had $4 in my pocket. Yeah. I got on the plane with Tony to go to London. As long as
first class, I'm sure.
I think it was.
Yeah.
And it was when David was doing the Rainbow shows, which was a kind of a pivotal point in his early career. He did 2 nights at the Rainbow Theatre in London, and he incorporated Lindsay Kemp's Mind Company into the show.
Oh.
Which got a lot of notice and a lot of press.
I think I've seen pictures, yeah.
And then we went on the road. We did some dates outside of London. So I'm like walking around thinking, why? If you don't have a function on a tour, you're kind of a fifth wheel. It's awkward. You're like, what am I doing here? Yeah. It's not necessarily fun.
No, no. Road stuff is not fun. I tell people, you get up in the morning, you get somebody in a bus, you travel for 4 hours, you see the back of a hotel or the kitchen, or the back area of a stage. You see your dressing room, you sound check, you get back to the hotel, you have 3 hours to eat and maybe take a nap, come back an hour ahead of time, and then this is all done at 11 o'clock. And then if it's radio promotion or you have to go to this party because the owner of the friend of somebody wants to meet you and you have to do it because of politics and the record label, and then you get 3 hours of sleep. And this goes on for 6 months. So it's not glamorous. That's it in a nutshell. It's horrible. It's really, really horrible.
So I am not quite sure what I'm there for or what I'm supposed to do, if anything. So we go to this town. I think it was the first night outside of London. And we get to this hotel, and I'm tired. I want to go to my room. But we're just sitting in the lobby. It's like everybody's just sitting there. Nobody's getting keys or doing it. There was no organization. Nobody was in charge of anything. So finally I thought, well, I'm just going to go get the keys because I wanted to get to my room.
Bango, you're the road manager. There you go.
Well, that's it. That's how it happened. Suddenly I got all the keys. I give them out to everybody. Then I make a list. Who's in what room? Blah. And I kind of became the road manager in a very natural, organic way. Then I'll just skip ahead. When we did the first American tour, we went by bus for the first week, not for very long. So we went by bus from New York to Cleveland. And I said, and then at this point, now they're calling me a road manager. So Tony says, "Well, Z, you'll be the road manager." And I looked at Tony and I said, "Tony, what does a road manager do?" He said, "Oh, Z, just make sure they talk Cleveland.
I could hear him saying that. He was my manager too. I could hear him saying that.
Which we did.
It was real rock and roll. You just get out there and you find a way to do it. Yeah, wonderful. When they went from Cleveland, was it just a bus or was it heavy equipment? Were there steamer trunks full of clothes? What kind of a?
No, that was
you as a road manager.
The equipment went on 2 trucks. We had C Factor did our lights, and we had a little company out of Pennsylvania called Clare Brothers that did the sound,
which are major now. I mean, Clare Brothers does Rolling Stones and major concerts, but
yeah. A little company then.
Wow.
And C Factor became very major, and this was the first C Factor. Bob C was just some kid from NYU who worked at the Far East.
Wow.
And he lived upstairs from the Fillmore East.
Wow.
He's fantastic.
Wow.
And he built a dynasty.
They both of those. Yeah.
So we had C Factor and we had the Clare Brothers, and then we were on the bus. The costume, Susie Fassay Ronson, she later married Nick Ronson, went down to 14th Street and bought some steamer trunk for like $25. And all the costumes were in that steamer trunk. And Susie took care of all the clothes.
So you had a costume person, there was you, and then the band and David and wife?
Susie was the hairdresser. She had done Ziggy Pop. So she did everybody's hair on the road, and she took care of the costumes, yeah.
Now we
had people. David had 2 friends, George Underwood and his wife Birgit.
Was Angie traveling with you guys?
I'm sorry?
Did Angie travel with you?
She'd come and go.
Right. So how many people were you managing?
Well, there were let's see, 3, Rano, Woody, and Trevor, and David. That's 4. There were about 30 of us. There were I just blanked out. Bodyguards.
No, that was for show, right? I mean, that was for show because there was nobody threatening David, right? It was just the rock star thing, right?
Well, how it was. But there were 3 of them. And then there was Mike Garson, the piano player. He joined us. So that was actually 5 musicians. George and Birgit. There were a lot of us.
All on one bus?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
But we only did the bus for a week. I was out of my mind after the first day.
No, I can imagine.
The English guys, also you think Ziggy Stardust, and you think glam, and you think of a certain kind of people. Well, really look at it. The boys were all from Northern Ireland. They were provincial as they could be. They had never been anywhere. These bodyguards were all kind of East End thugs. They were like, they would start drinking at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it was like rock. It was anything but fun. And I'm trying to it's like wrestling cats to get them on and off the bus and da-da-da.
Yeah, because
that wasn't fun.
I went through that. So did you have? We had a mutual friend, Steve Pickett, and I brought him along, Village People, and he used to wash their underwear every night, and sometimes in the sink, because we were in a small town, there was no laundromat, and we had a show the next day, and he'd literally wash out their dance straps and their underwear and hang it up in his room, and I'd go to his room, and there'd be clothes everywhere because they sweat when they dance, and they had to have fresh costumes the next day, and there weren't duplicates. You know what I mean? And those are some of the challenges of being on the road. And I was the last person to sleep and the first person to wake up. Yeah. I had to give wake-up calls to everybody an hour before. Yes, wake-up calls. Yeah. And check everybody at the hotel. And then I would get, my room is looking east, and I might want my room to look west. Or how come he has a bigger bed than I have a bigger bed? And I mean, people don't understand what a road manager is like. It's great. You travel the world for free. If you're lucky, eating some fancy restaurants. I remember at one point with the Village People, we went to the second most famous restaurant in the whole world. There was a 5-star Michelin thing in France. The owner owned the restaurant across the street, a club. We sit down to eat, and it's going to be the full champagne and $1 million meal, and they tapped me on the shoulders the first course. We have a problem over at the club, and I had to go solve it. By the time I came back, everybody was, that was delicious, and you missed it. So that's the thing of a road manager. You know what I mean? You're the last part. Yeah, you're the bottom of the bucket, but you're running the show. You know what I mean? So What was David like on the road? Was he a princess? Did he get nervous an hour before? Was he a bitch about? Did he do his own makeup? That kind of stuff. What was it like?
Well, first of all, let me explain one other thing about this tour. We started in the beginning of September, and we ended in the middle of December.
That's short.
That's 3 months. But we only did 17 dates.
Is this just U.S. or is this U.S., England, and Japan?
No, U.S. It took us 3 months to do it. First of all, David wouldn't fly. So he had to go everywhere by car or train. So we would sometimes wait for him for a week.
So they're paying for a hotel room for how many people waiting for him to show up?
30, 35, yeah.
Wow. So the money went out the window fast. Wow.
Well, what DeFries and but this wasn't totally intentional. It was a happy accident. We got RCA to allow, the RCA had an internal travel agent. They booked all the transportation for us. So because they did, they never agreed to pay for anything. They agreed that we could use their travel agency. So we would go to whatever hotel. We didn't pay when we left. And the hotel would bill it back to RCA Travel.
Oh my God.
RCA was paying. RCA didn't agree to pay. We were supposed to pay.
So that all became a freebie?
Well,
or was it deducted from royalties?
Eventually, the hens came home to roost. But we spent over $400,000
in those days. Oh my God!
Yeah, but the gross of the tour was $100,000. This is where DeFries was totally brilliant. Instead of looking at this as a negative, because now David or Main Man or whoever is in the hole, the RCA, for all this money, DeFries took it as a positive and went back to RCA and persuaded them that they should be in the touring business.
So was this, wait a minute, this is a major thing because record companies didn't do tour support. So this was the beginning of record companies doing tour support?
Kind of, yeah.
Wow. Wow, that's a major thing
TV
for artists.
Radio advertising, they didn't do that either. They didn't do, it was unheard of to do TV advertising. He persuaded them to do that.
Wow, wow, that's a major milestone in music because
he's responsible for a lot of major milestones. The whole deal was a major milestone because he had this not at that point. The next year he had a 90-10 deal with the expenses coming out of the 10. That means, but even then, he had a guarantee that was non-refundable, so that if the promoter didn't make his money back, he still had to pay the guarantee.
Wow.
Which DeFries, in his defense, sometimes didn't take. We had one guy in St. Louis and Kansas City who really lost his shirt. I think, maybe DeFries didn't take it. I don't remember.
Well, there's something I want to ask because I think it was Jamie from Main Man told me when they did the Ziggy Stardust tour movie that it wasn't Ziggy Stardust wasn't a national phenomenon then, and when they did the movie, people came down from the balcony and pushed them up front to make it look like it was more crowded than it actually was. Was that true when they filmed that?
No, that's not true.
Oh, okay.
Ziggy Stardust was huge in England.
Well, but it didn't work well over here, right?
It worked well, but it wasn't huge. David was cult here.
Was he sold out when he was on the road? Or
no. Well, I'll tell you exactly what happened. On that first tour, again, it took 3 months to do.
Of Ziggy Stardust.
Our first date was in Cleveland, and we chose Cleveland for 2 reasons. Number one, there was a boy named Brian Kinchy who recently died. He had a fan club for David, because David did have a cult following from years before. Brian Kinchy was the president of the David Bowie fan club in the U.S., and there was a radio station called WMMX. Billy Bass was the DJ, He's the only DJ in the United States that had played David Bowie. So David had some radio play, and he had this fan club in Cleveland. We started in Cleveland with these promoters, the Belkins. They were big promoters in the Midwest. We did the small side of the Cleveland Music Hall, which was about 3,000 seats. I think we did good business. Anyway, by December of the same year, 3 months later, we went back to Cleveland and we played. I remember it as being 2 nights. It might have been 1 night. The big side of the music hall, which was 10,000 seats. I think we did two shows. So within that period of time, it had burst.
Yeah. Were you handling money?
And a lot of it was because it wasn't record sales and it wasn't radio play. It was press.
Yes.
He got phenomenal press. During that time, he was on the cover of Rolling Stone. We had a journalist on the road with us for like a week or so. And the press was amazing. So the word of mouth was really, really big. But the record sales were not.
I remember teen magazines, Tiger Beat, those sort of things. I always had them on the cover. Were you handling money, or is money just a separate thing that was wired between the promoter and me? Because I had to carry $30,000, $50,000, $100,000 with me with Village people, and it was.
I carried money, and DeFreeze had money. Summertime.
I mean, you got paid were you there? I used to count, $10, $20, $30,000 before the guys would go on stage. Did you have to do that as well?
Sometimes. Yeah.
And did you have regional promoters? Did you have a different promoter in each city? So we
had almost a different promoter in every city. There were no regional promoters then.
Oh my God! So that means
came later. That came within a few years. But we had our promoter in Memphis was an 18-year-old kid.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, you probably went from people who handled big name acts like Nina Simone to suddenly somebody who wanted oh my God, wow. So you really. As a road manager, you had to be self-sufficient and act in crisis. So
one of my favorite things that happened as a road manager.
Oh, there we go. I love this, yeah.
We were in Florida, in Miami. And we were actually in Hollandale. I don't know if you know Hollandale.
Yeah, I lived in Aventura right near it, yeah.
All right, well...
there's a good peep show with the glory hole in Hollandale.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. That's how I know Hallandale.
Well, I had nobody got paid. You got to realize also.
Yeah.
Nobody got salaries. They were supposed to get a monthly stipend in their bank accounts in England or wherever, but I don't even know if that was happening. And we didn't have per diems. If you needed something, if you needed $5, you had to come to me. And I would write a petty cash slip and give you $5 to get a hamburger. Or if you needed a pair of shoes, all that kind of stuff. Then, sorry, my phone's just got screwed up for a second. But okay, so we get to Miami, and we are out of money.
Oh, my God.
We have no money at all. So Tony is supposed to wire me some money from New York. So it's supposed to come like the next morning. So that night, I think I had like $20 for all of us.
Well, was food included? How did people eat? Was the hotels providing the food? Were the venues providing?
We'd signed for everything in the hotel.
So everybody did room service. So there were 30 room service things, and that's how people. Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah, well, this hotel had a pretty good restaurant. We would sign for everything, and it would all go back to RCA.
And was it part of the deal that you had to have a restaurant in the hotel, otherwise you wouldn't stay there?
Oh, yeah, we wouldn't stay there.
Yeah. Okay, good. No, I'm just curious, because these are things that I had to do as a road manager.
Oh, no, absolutely.
Right.
We were supposed to stay at the Chateau Marmont in L.A., and we didn't stay there because they didn't have food at the time.
Oh, interesting.
So we stayed at the Beverly Hills instead. So Lee Childers was our advance man. He would go on ahead and kind of scope everything out and blah, blah. But Lee was in Miami with me. So Lee and I said, well, we only had $20, so Lee and I decided to go out.
You're in Miami, you got to go out. That's fabulous. Wow.
Yes. So we decided to go out, and we went out, and we spent, let's see. Well, we spent most of the money. We spent most of the money. We took a cab back to. I didn't drive. He didn't drive. Took a cab back to the hotel. Blah blah blah. So the next morning, next day, it wasn't the morning. It was 2:00 in the afternoon. I get a cab to go to, we're in actually Hollandale. The money was coming to a bank in Hollywood, I think. Yeah. Anyway, it wasn't that far from Dania Beach.
Yeah.
And at that time, Dania Beach was a gay beach. Lee and I had walked to Dania Beach. So I go to the bank. The banks in Florida close at 2, not 3. So first of all, they were closed. But I'm a, manic, crazed New York road manager, whatever. So I insisted that they let me in, which they did.
Wow.
But guess what? The money hadn't arrived. There was no money in this bank. Okay, so now I have to go back to Hollandale, and I had $5 left. And I thought, well, I knew it wasn't enough to get back to the hotel, but I thought, well, I'll just get a cab and I'll take it as far as I can. So I did. And then I got to Dania, but I was going by Dania Beach, and I thought, oh, I can get out here, and I'll meet some guy and have him give me a ride to the rest of the day.
Yeah. Well, that's good thinking. Yeah. That's the way I need a place to stay. I'll meet a guy. I'm hungry. I'll meet a guy. Yeah.
But I'm dressed in my little road manager outfit, whatever it was, and I had this elephant skin briefcase with me. So I go down to the beach, and it's like...
how old were you, Tony? How old were you doing this?
26. So I'm walking down the beach, and I started getting sick. And there was nobody on the beach. I'm like, what's going on? It was red tide.
Which we have right now. Oh, my God.
You have it now.
Yeah, oh, my God. Oh, my God.
I didn't know what red tide was. It was red tide. There was nobody around.
Oh, my God.
And I walked down the beach. I'm walking, and there's nobody. So I thought, well, I'll go to the road and see what. But to get to the road, I had to go through water. So I took all my clothes off. Folded them on my briefcase, put my briefcase on my head, waded across the water. Now I'm in like a jungle.
So I know that beach, and they now have a boardwalk that goes across it. But I know what you're talking about because the Dania Beach is sort of like a little island.
Yeah,
and there is basically jungle there. They've made a path through the jungle, and they put a formal bridge across it. But in those days, there weren't. Wow.
So I get into this little jungle, and I did meet a guy. I did have some fun.
Yeah, in the jungle, of course, in the bushes. Right. There you go. If it's a good beach, the bushes are busy. Yeah.
Right. I had a great time, and then I go to the road, and I started hitchhiking in. Some other gay guy stopped and gave me a ride back to the hotel.
Oh, wow. And you were performing that night?
I don't remember about that. We may have already performed. I'm not sure about that. But then, I think the RCA I had to drive me to the bank the following day to get the money, and the money was there the next day.
What was Japan like? I went once with Village People. We did a Watch My Line TV show. We went with Tabitha from Bewitched. There were 2 twins, and we had to do one of these out of costume, Watch My Line, and the Japanese version of it. And I was blown away then in the 90s how amazing Japan was. What was it like?
Well, it was fascinating.
Ziggy Stardust going to Japan. Was that culture there? Was the the anime and that type of Japanese?
No. As a matter of fact.
So he must have been a real freak then to the Japanese, right?
Well, not totally, because by that time he was doing a lot of the Kansai Yamamoto costumes, and everything he was doing was very relatable because it had that kabuki background to it. It looked like kabuki, a lot of it. The kids in Japan that was 73. In 1973, still wore uniforms to school. The kids would come to the concerts. The concerts were kind of early. They were all in school uniforms. There were no freaky kids.
Wow.
We had one Japanese woman. Yeah, her name was Yako, and she worked with us. They thought she was a big freak because she didn't dress like the rest of the Japanese. At that time, I would say. Almost 50% of the women still wore traditional outfits.
Wow.
So we had dinner at Kansai Yamamoto's apartment. He was a top designer, as modern as could be. His wife was wearing traditional Japanese clothing and waited on us. She did not sit
in a kimono and white face?
I don't remember about the white face.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
She did not sit with us. She prepared the meal and waited on us like a servant.
Wow.
So he was the most modern designer living a very, very traditional Japanese life.
What was,
This is 1973. When did they become open to the world? Around 1900?
yeah, something like that. Yeah.
It wasn't that long before.
Yeah. Yeah.
The concerts were all sensational. The problem, it was more a problem for me as the road manager because the Japanese, it's not, you never disagree. You never say no. The Japanese do not say no. That doesn't mean they mean yes. So that I would go over with them what we needed, what we wanted to do. They would agree, but then they wouldn't do it. They would do their own thing. And the biggest thing happened at one of the last. It was the last show in Tokyo. We had no opening act. We had a break in the middle of the show, and like a little intermission. So what we wanted was to have very tight security for the first part of the show, and then we wanted no security for the second half of the show.
So
we wanted kids to be able to rush the stage, so that it ended with this really big build-up. It built excitement. Okay, they agreed to do that. This show, instead of doing that, they had like all these security people. Oh yeah. Now you know what? I don't remember how they did. They had so many security that they were like killing the show.
Wow.
So and they had chairs everywhere with all these security guys. And we began to remove the chairs. Andy Bowie.
There you rock and roll. There you go. Yeah.
Anyway, the kids rushed the stage, and they're bouncing up and down in the orchestra pit. And in Japan, they had these they were like elevators. They went up and down the orchestra pits.
Yes. Oh my God.
Down, and it didn't collapse, but they bent it. It almost collapsed.
Wow.
They did thousands and thousands of dollars worth of damage.
Oh wow.
But it was all because of the mishandling of the security. But it wasn't it wasn't pretty. Let me tell you.
What was David like before going on? Did he do his own makeup? Did somebody do it for him? Was he a nervous guy? Was he quiet? Did he have a routine? Don't bother me, or I need everybody here as a security blanket. What was he like the hour before he went on stage or whatever?
He usually did his own. Sometimes I did it. If it was a really big special gig, we would have a makeup artist, but that was more.
You did a lot of his makeup?
Sometimes I did, yeah.
Wow.
I was really good at makeup. I could do his makeup.
Wow.
I carried a lot of my theater habits with me. We didn't allow anybody backstage, before or after, because it wasn't a party, it was work.
Was he nervous? Was he quiet? Was he neurotic? I mean, what was he like before he went on?
No, he wasn't neurotic. I wouldn't call him neurotic at all. He was focused. He could be nervous once in a while. Not that, it's like, took me years to realize, like, on that first trip to Cleveland, for example. We didn't go all the way to Cleveland on the bus. We stopped in Erie for the night. It took me years in hindsight to think, because he was kind of like weird and eerie. It's a long story involving Angie, which I'm not going to get into right now, but he's like wandering around looking for her, and it took me years to realize, well, he was nervous. It was his first show in the United States. There was a lot riding on that show, but he was quiet. You wouldn't really see that nervousness.
And he didn't have a routine like turning towards the east and baying at the moon, or no weird routine.
No, we would do a sound check mostly every afternoon at 4.
Oh.
Sometimes we didn't feel like doing it. Bronson would do it. But that was part of the process, I think.
You fall into a routine, so there becomes a routine of being on the road.
The routine was the sound check, go back to the hotel, have something to eat, and then go back and do the show.
Yeah, we used to take naps.
At that time, during Ziggy, there were absolutely no drugs on the road. Nothing. There was drinking, but not really a lot.
So Billy told me that there was a movie or something they were filming backstage, and David was shoving coke up his nose or something and slammed the door, and it was caught on film or something like that.
Who told you that?
Billy, my lab.
Oh. Well, if that happened,
well, was he doing a lot of, was coke a big thing? I mean, were there a lot of drugs? Was it drinking?
Ziggy, not during Ziggy. Not until the next year.
I see. Right. Right. And that's a whole other interview and a whole other story.
Well, that's Diamond Dogs. It happened overnight, kind of. So in LA, they did.
Yeah, he went to LA. Yeah.
Documentary, the BBC did it, and David was heavily involved with Coke at that time.
Yeah, I remember. I telling my stories. Trudy Heller's David was recording at Young Americans at Electric Lady. Came around the block to visit Cherry. We all walked back, and I got to meet Luther Vandross, who did the backgrounds, and they were smoking and drinking and doing tons of coke. I got to hear Young Americans on the 24 track before it was mixed, which is brilliant. But I was more interested in a synthesizer, even though Bowie was my idol and stuff. But there were a lot of drugs. But that's a whole other thing. So what are you doing? I mean, are you directing? I know you like to direct. I mean, what are you doing these days? I know you have a house in the country you like to go to and reflect on your David Bowie years. Why haven't you written a book?
I did.
Oh, okay. Shows you how much. Maybe I should do my research. How about that? Is it a Bowie book?
Well, I wrote a book years ago with Henry Edwards called Stardust, the David Bowie story.
Oh, that's yours. I didn't know. I know the Henry Edwards. I didn't realize you were involved. I know that book, but I didn't realize you were involved in it. Okay.
Yeah, it's my book, but I don't like to take claim for it because it wasn't the book I wanted to do, and it kind of got hijacked. And,
why don't you write your own book? I couldn't get my book out, so I did a video series. All you got to do is take your phone like this and tell 5-minute stories. These are fascinating.
I keep thinking about it. I know time's running out, but...
yeah, really. I mean, in a weird way, I'm an old dude these days, but I saw a lot of this, and a lot of this isn't properly documented, and there's some really great stuff just for history. And in a way, I almost feel like I have to do it because no one else is doing it. I have to tell these stories, and you should too. So, think about it. There's some good stuff here.
About it.
If you need help, I can tell you how to do it via video. We play a little game here called 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. You don't have to play it. If you want, it's one of 3 evils. The first question is the most filthiest sexual question you've been ever asked. The second choice is you have to sing a
question that I've been ever asked?
Yeah, I'm going to ask you something really just disgusting. The second question would be, second choice is you get to sing a verse or a chorus of a song that you like, well, whatever you want. This is your choices, or you can do none of them. And the third one is you have to give us your best fart sound using your mouth or your anus.
Dirty sex question.
Is that a dirty sex question? I'll ask you the same question that I asked Steve Bronski from Bronski Beat. What was the biggest? Not in a photograph or a movie. What is the biggest dick you've ever seen in your life in person?
Oh, the biggest dick I've ever seen in person? Interesting. And I know I've seen quite a few.
I saw one in Germany that was 14 inches long, soft. You know what I mean? The guy chased me around a bathhouse because I wasn't interested. So I became. Behind him there was a train of like 20 guys following him around. He's walking around with his towel off, and his dick's like 2 inches from his knees. You know what I mean? So, and I was like, oh please, I've seen stuff before. And of course he followed me because I wasn't interested. So.
I think it was actually a guy. Could that be the biggest dick ever?
Well, if you don't remember, you can get out of it right now by saying, I don't remember. How about that?
Okay, maybe I don't remember.
There you go. I want to thank you, Tony. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you want to put in there or that you want to say?
I mean, we could talk for 10 more hours.
Well, that's why I think you should do a book or a little video series. I think it's really important that people get to hear this stuff. It's a piece of history. There's a whole New York underground scene and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's got to be documented.
What's interesting is we've known each other so many years, and there's so much we don't know about each other.
Yeah, really. Well. There was that time in the late 60s, early 70s that we were together, and then I kind of branched off to the side because I was doing other things, soundtracks for porn movies, and I hung out then at gay bars, which were different than the rock and roll bars. So a lot of my rock and roll friends were left behind while I got into gay bars, and then because of the porn stuff, I got a movie thing, and then I went off into the hip hop dance world, which is a lot different than the bass rock and roll people that I hung around with. My bass is rock and roll, not hip hop. You know, I grew up with.
Let's not forget those fantastic shows that you and I did together.
Yes, we did some great shows. I remember at the Tunnel, where there were giant, massive 7 or 8 foot high gold frames with people in it. John Sex we did a show with, who was a great performer.
That show that we did at the Tunnel, that really stuck because you did something, or we did something together that was so fascinating. You did that soundtrack for my little tableaus, and so when you walked from one part of that club to the other part, you walked almost through a sound tunnel.
Yeah. Well,
fascinating.
I'm not a musician. I don't know how to read and write music to this day. I mean, I can score a 200-person orchestra and choir by ear, but I can't read or write music. So back in those days, I was experimenting with sound. So I did your stuff. I did John Sex stuff. I did Cherry Vanilla. I did sound installations at Club 57, and 3 of my pieces wound up in the permanent collection of MoMA. How does a musician wind up in MoMA? You know what I mean? So that was a point before I wrote music that I was still doing this stuff, and I would love to do stuff anytime you want. There's buildings, and I want to do outdoor installations, and I want to bring it to shopping malls across America, and people go, what the fuck is that? You know, you ever want to do something? I'm there with you. I only remember the Tunnel. Can you remember other ones?
We did stuff with Cherry.
Yeah, she used to do poetry, and you were directing, and I would do the music for it.
The Tunnel I love because we mixed in some of her tapes with it.
Yeah.
You know, I called Lost Line. And we took her voice, and you couldn't really understand what she was saying, but you would catch a word every now and then.
Do you have those cassettes?
I soundscape out of that, so it was the background for this whole.
Do you have that on cassette by any chance? Do you have that on cassette or reel to reel anywhere?
Oh, I don't have anything. If
you did, I would release it. I could restore audio. All right, Tony, I want to thank you so much, so much. I'm going to play a little outro song, and thank you. And smartly, you ducked out of using a senior moment where you can't remember what the biggest stick was, but that's great. I love you, my darling, and
I love you too.
Yeah, you got to document this stuff. All right.